I decided to do my infographic on an anime franchise called WIXOSS. I chose to do it on this topic because I was just finishing up the series and found it to be really interesting. There were many elements and design decisions that went into making my infographic. Let's talk about them. First, let's talk about visual potential and appearance. The visual potential of appearance deals with allowing the viewers to either recognize or learn. I chose to show WIXOSS cards since they play a big part in this series as the show revolves around this card game. Blue and white were chosen as the main colors based on my color model, but the only use of these two colors, along with the size of the display in comparison to the other elements, make the cards stand out. The positioning of the cards in the center of my infographic also add to it being the first element seen when a viewer first looks at my infographic. Viewers will either be able to recognize these cards if they are familiar with the show or the game, or they'll be able to hopefully interpret and learn that the series has to do with a card game. Next, I will talk about location. The visual potential of location focuses on displaying where, which can be shown on a geographic map or some sort of other map. My location first shows a map of Japan and then a close-up map of Tokyo, and I use line encoding to show how these two maps are connected. I use both position and color encoding to highlight the area of Tokyo on the map of Japan, and then I use these again using a darker blue color to represent the specific area on the map of Tokyo to show the exact district that the show takes place in. I also use text encoding in addition to color encoding in order to identify the district. Moving on to numbers, my numbers display shows the average scoring for the series based off of the 3 shows and 1 movie that have already been aired. 2 scores are shown, one from my anime list and another from AnyDB. The visual potential of numbers deals with showing numbers visually, not with just a number shown in text. I exploit the visual potential of numbers through use of amount encoding, which is represented by the wedges making up a circle. I also use color encoding. The blue wedge represents the score out of 10 on a circle, while the remaining amount is shown in white. A larger filled in blue wedge means a higher score. I chose to use these two colors to match my color model, but also because using blue to represent the score makes sense logically as it stands out more than white. I use text encoding so that viewers can easily see the exact score, which is represented by the blue wedge in big font. But I also use text encoding to label each of the scores so that viewers know which score came from which database. By having 2 of these circles on top of each other, I'm also able to compare the 2 different databases these scores come from, as viewers can just easily take a glance at the scores, or they can take a glance at the amount of blue and wedge and see the difference. The visual potential relationship focuses on showing connections or relationships. In this display, I'm showing the relationship between the shows and movie that are part of the franchise. Color encoding is used to distinguish the 2 halves of the series into a blue and white category based on the setting and characters of each show. Text encoding is used to identify the shows and the exact relationship between 2 shows in this series, such as whether a show is a sequel or if it's a movie of the previous show. I use position encoding by having shows going across the top row while the one movie is on the row below it. Arrows are also used as line treatment encoding to show direct relationships between 2 shows in the series. The visual potential of time uses position in order to display events in time. With a timeline, I display the season and year when each show in the series aired relative to each other through the use of position encoding. The timeline is ordered from earliest aired to latest. The dots between each label is representative of the amount of time between the airing of each show relative to each other. I also use text encoding to label the points in time, which I combine with color encoding. The points of date airings are blue since they will be easily noticeable against the white points. Labels of the seasons and years are displayed in a gray color, while the show's titles are displayed in white, since I want viewers to notice the title first to match with the image on the timeline when they first look at the timeline. I will now go more in depth on my chosen design models and decisions. The tone I get from my color model is cool and calming colors, but that are also not overwhelming and pleasant to look at against the dark gray background. This ties into the monochromatic color harmony and the use of the gray, white, blue, and black colors that fit well together. I chose this color model because of its calmness that fits in with the mood of this specific anime. It's a somewhat darker and not too energetic anime. I emulate my color model in a variety of ways. Throughout my final infographic, I keep the dark gray background that my color model uses. My color model always used blue in addition to either white, gray, or black to display statistics or comparisons in color highlighting and encoding. In each of my displays, I use blue and white on my displays, with blue either being the main focus point or one of two categories. I emulate my color model in a variety of ways. Throughout my final infographic, I keep the dark gray background that my color model uses. My color model always used blue in addition to either white, gray, or black to display statistics or comparisons in color highlighting and encoding. In each of my displays, I use blue and white on my displays, with blue either being the main focus point or one of two categories. I emulate my color model in a variety of ways. Throughout my final infographic, I keep the dark gray background that my color model uses. My color model always used blue in addition to either white, gray, or black to display statistics or comparisons in color highlighting and encoding. In each of my displays, I use blue and white on my displays, with blue either being the main focus point or one of two categories. My color model only uses black in one display of the infographic and is used as color encoding to represent one of two categories. Black is not used anywhere else in this color model. In my final infographic, I deviate a bit from the use of black on my color model. While I only use black in one of my displays, the time display, I do not use it for color encoding. I do not use black as any part of any of my color encoding, since many people felt that the black stands out less when it's being used in comparison with any of the other colors and would just give the black encoded category lesser meaning. For each of my displays, I use white headings with a gray subtitle in order to match my color model. For description text, I'm consistent in my use of the gray color that my color model uses. For labels, I use either white or gray depending on the other colors used in the displays, since my color model uses both of these colors for labels. However, they only use white for numbers, which I follow in my numbers display. I chose my typography model based on a few factors. I wanted my typography to be simple, modern, but also practical. The font used in my chosen typography model is a sans serif font, which gives a feeling of minimalism. The font I chose that was similar to my model is called Avenir, and it's very easy to read as both heading and body text. I use capitalized headings for each display to match my typography model. By using one font with different sizes and weights throughout my infographic, the viewer is less likely to feel overwhelmed as they might if I had used many different fonts. Identity labels in my model are used in a variety of sizes and weights. How I choose which size and weight to use depends on if I want to emphasize the label. For example, I use a medium weight for my sequel and movie labels in my relationship display, but I use a heavier weight for the labels of the show titles. In my location display, I also use a heavier weight for the map label of Ikebukuro, Tokyo, as I want to attract viewers to this label first. In this display, I also bold the Toshima, Tokyo, Japan text in my description paragraph for viewers that may just want to skim the paragraph and not read the whole thing, but still want to give them a feel for what is important to look at. I still follow my model, as my model occasionally does do this. There is only one case where I use a precision label in my infographic, and that's in my numbers display. While my typography model tends to position these labels to the side of the numbers element, I put mine inside so that it would have room on the side for a description. However, I made sure to match the font size that was used, which is a larger font size in comparison to everything else. My typography model uses many identity labels throughout the entire infographic. For my infographic, I follow this by using at least one identity label in each display. I use proximity as my association strategy for identify labels. For both my model and infographic, these labels are either positioned on top or to the side of the element in the display so that it's clear which element the label refers to. I also use proximity for headings and subtitles of sections. They are always positioned in the upper left corner of a section so that it's clear which section the heading goes with. My typography has only one display which uses leader lines, and that's in their main display. I do not have any instances of leader lines in my main display because I feel that my main display does not need any text to describe it, since there's already text on it that's part of the image. I use leader lines in only one instance of my final infographic. I use it in my time display, and while this is not my main display, I use leader lines to better emulate my visual language. I mainly use both position and sizing to create visual hierarchy. I use my appearance display as the main display, which can clearly be seen as larger than my other displays, and it's also centered horizontally in my infographic. I position my infographic title at the upper left corner in order to follow my layout model, but also because viewers tend to read from left to right and then top to bottom. This title is also larger in comparison to my section headings. My infographic does not have any particular flow or story to it, but I do group the two sections regarding the individual shows and information about them at the bottom. Despite a lack of visual hierarchy in this aspect, I feel that this does not hurt my infographic, as I'm simply trying to tell viewers about the anime and different information about it that they might find interesting. One piece of information is not necessarily more important than the other, and viewers can use the headings and subtitles to quickly look at what they find interesting. The visual language I chose uses a variety of elements. Some elements have a high level of realism with the use of shaded photographic elements. Others are icons that have some level of detail. These icons are abstracted in that they're flat icons with simplified details, but still contain a good amount of detail. Half of the elements use borders to highlight the elements, while others do not. And a large variety of shapes are used in terms of icons that are their own shape, rounded circles, squares, and just other shapes, including angles such as with the chart. My model also makes use of dotted lines, which I incorporated in a few of my displays. However, I decided to go against this and use straight lines for my sections, as I felt that my infographic would match my layout model more this way. My visual language model itself has a ton of variety in terms of the different uses of shapes and realistic images. Some of my sections contain shapes, some of my sections contain images, and some of them contain both. This allowed me to easily have variety while also emulating my visual language model. This is done through the use of many different shapes such as rectangles or circles. However, I'm able to put all my displays together to create unity by being consistent with the use of the same colors, which is actually quite different from my visual language model. My visual language model uses a different colored background for each section, but I keep a dark consistent gray background across my entire infographic. I also have each of my displays clearly sectioned out in a similar fashion in terms of the straight lines, headings, and subheadings. As opposed to many infographics that are vertical, I chose a layout model that was more horizontal. My layout model has the title on top and then 3 columns of content. Due to the number of displays that I have, I was unable to do this. However, I was able to incorporate the title on top and 3 columns of content, but had to add an additional row on the bottom that contains only 2 columns of content. To emulate my layout model even more, I added a background to just the title of my infographic. While this does not necessarily match my visual language model, I feel that this is similar enough to my typography model, which has the infographic title heading on a different colored background and makes the title of the infographic stand out more. To keep a similar feel in my layout model while still being able to fit everything in my infographic, I have 2 rows excluding the title rather than 3 columns of content that my layout model has. Each section is aligned either vertically or horizontally, or both, depending on where it is in the infographic, and has a main heading with a subtitle. Lines are also used to break out the sections and ensure that they are aligned. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my video and my infographic.